The morning mist clung to the wooden walls of Bjornstead, like the breath of sleeping gods. Jarl Erik Ironhand stood at the edge of his great hall's platform, watching his warriors prepare for the day's training. His weathered hands gripped the carved dragon heads that adorned the railing, knuckles white with the weight of an oath that had changed everything. 3 moons had passed since that fateful night when old Gunnar Stormbeard lay dying in his bed, fever burning through his massive frame like wildfire through dry timber. The veteran warrior, who had sailed with Erik's father on countless raids across the North Sea, had called Erik to his side with urgent, rasping breaths. "My lord," Gunnar had wheezed, his eyes clouded with approaching death. "I have served your family for 30 winters. I ask one final favor." His gnarled hand had reached for Erik's arm with surprising strength. "My daughter Astrid, she has no brothers, no husband to protect her when I join our ancestors in the Hall of the Slain. She is different from other maidens, my lord. The other men mock her size, call her names that wound deeper than any blade." Erik had knelt beside the dying warrior's bed, honoring the man who had saved his life in battle more than once. "Speak your wish, old friend. Swear to me, by Thor's hammer and your father's memory, that you will take her as wife. Protect her honor as you would your own sister. She may not be fair like the other women, but she has the heart of a true Shieldmaiden and the strength of 10 men. The oath had been sworn that very night, witnessed by the flickering flames of the dying man's hearth fire. Erik had clasped Gunnar's hand and spoken the binding words that no honorable man could break. By dawn, Gunnar's spirit had departed for Valhalla, leaving behind a daughter who now bore the protection of the most powerful Jarl in the Northern Territories. Astrid Gunnarsdottir was indeed different from the slender, delicate women who typically caught the eye of Viking warriors. She stood nearly as tall as most men, with broad shoulders and a frame that spoke of strength rather than fragile beauty. Her auburn hair hung in thick braids down her back, and her green eyes held an intelligence that many found unsettling in a woman. The other villagers whispered behind their hands when she passed, some calling her the Mountain Maiden, or worse names that Erik had forbidden in his presence. But Erik had watched her during the funeral rites for her father, and what he saw impressed him more than her critics realized. When the funeral pyre blazed high into the night sky, Astrid had not wept or wailed like other mourning women. Instead, she had stood straight as a spear shaft, chanting the death songs in a voice that carried over the crackling flames with haunting beauty. Her knowledge of the old ways, the poems and stories that preserved their people's history, rivaled that of the most learned skalds. The wedding had been arranged quickly, as was proper for such unions. Erik's hall had been decorated with pine boughs and carved runes of blessing, while the finest ale and mead flowed freely for all who attended. Astrid had worn her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her fuller figure, and had spoken her vows in a clear, steady voice that betrayed no fear or shame. Now, as autumn painted the fjord in shades of gold and crimson, Erik found himself married to a woman who defied every expectation he had held. On their wedding night, he had approached the marriage bed with duty rather than desire, honoring his oath to Gunnar while expecting little beyond the basic requirements of husband and wife. What he discovered had shaken his understanding of strength, beauty, and worth. Astrid possessed a mind as sharp as any weapon in his armory. She could recite the genealogies of every major family for 5 generations, calculate trade profits and losses faster than his most experienced merchants, and discuss battle tactics with insights that impressed even his most seasoned warriors. Her physical strength was not merely bulk, but trained power. She had been secretly practicing with weapons since childhood, learning from her father the skills that most women were forbidden to develop. But it was her unexpected gentleness that truly surprised Erik. Despite her imposing size and warrior's strength, Astrid possessed a tender heart that showed itself in small, careful ways. She would tend injured animals with infinite patience, weave beautiful tapestries that told the stories of their ancestors, and sing lullabies to the village children in a voice as sweet as summer rain. As Erik watched the morning training session, he noticed Astrid emerging from their private chambers, fully dressed in practical wool and leather. She had adapted quickly to her role as Jarl's wife, taking on the management of household affairs with the same competence she brought to everything else. The servants, initially skeptical of their unusual mistress, had come to respect her fair judgment and generous nature. But Erik sensed something different about his wife this morning. There was a nervous energy in her movements, a brightness in her eyes that suggested important news. As she approached him across the hall, he noticed her hand resting protectively over her stomach, and sudden understanding struck him like lightning from Thor's hammer. The sworn vow that had begun as duty was about to become something far more complex and wonderful than either of them had imagined. Erik turned from the training grounds as Astrid approached, her footsteps sure and steady across the wooden planks of the hall. The morning light, streaming through the narrow windows, caught the copper highlights in her auburn hair, and he found himself studying her face with new attention. There was indeed something different about her today, a glow that had nothing to do with the firelight or autumn sun. "My lord," she said, inclining her head in the respectful greeting she had maintained since their wedding, despite his repeated requests that she simply call him by name when they were alone. "I must speak with you privately." Erik gestured toward the carved wooden chairs that sat near the great hearth, where they could talk without being overheard by the servants preparing the morning meal. As they settled into their seats, he noticed how Astrid's hands smoothed over her woolen dress, the gesture unconscious, yet somehow protective. "What weighs on your mind, wife?" he asked, using the gentler tone he had developed when speaking with her. In the months since their marriage, he had learned that Astrid responded better to quiet conversation than to the booming commands he used with his warriors. Astrid looked down at her hands for a moment, then lifted her green eyes to meet his. "I carry your child, husband. The signs are unmistakable, and the wise woman Sigrid has confirmed it." The words hung in the air between them, like the smoke from the hearth fire. Erik felt a rush of emotions he had not expected. Pride certainly, for what man did not wish for sons to carry on his name and legacy, but there was something deeper, a warmth that spread through his chest as he looked at this remarkable woman who had already given him so much more than he had anticipated. "This is joyous news," he said, reaching across to cover her hands with his. "When will the child come?" "With the spring planting, if the gods will it," Astrid replied. Her voice carried a mix of happiness and apprehension that Erik was beginning to recognize. "I know you hoped for heirs, my lord. I pray I will give you strong sons worthy of your name." Erik studied her face, seeing the vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "And if the gods bless us with daughters, a child with your intelligence and courage would be a gift regardless of whether it carries a sword or a distaff." The surprise in Astrid's eyes told him that few men had ever spoken such words to her. In their society, women were valued primarily for their ability to bear male heirs. Yet Erik found himself hoping their child would inherit Astrid's remarkable mind and strength of character, regardless of its gender. "You have given me more than I expected from our union," Erik continued, his voice growing thoughtful. "When I swore that oath to your father, I thought I was accepting a burden out of honor and duty. Instead, I find myself married to a woman whose worth exceeds that of many warriors I have known." Astrid's cheeks flushed pink at his words. "You speak kindly, husband, but I know what I am. I know how I appear to others, how different I am from the women who typically catch men's favor." "Different, yes," Erik agreed, then surprised himself with his next words. "But not lesser. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Astrid Gunnarsdottir?" She shook her head, waiting for his answer with the wariness of someone long accustomed to harsh judgments. "I see a woman who can recite the complete saga of Ragnar Lothbrok from memory, who can calculate the grain supplies needed for a winter siege, who tends wounded animals with the same skill that healers use on men. I see someone who has earned the respect of every servant in this hall through fair treatment and wise decisions." Erik leaned forward in his chair, his voice growing more intense. "Yesterday, when young Olaf brought news of raiders spotted near the southern borders, you were the first to suggest checking the fishing villages for signs of their ships. That insight may save lives, Astrid. Your mind works like a strategist's, seeing connections and possibilities that others miss." The color in Astrid's cheeks deepened, but now her eyes held wonder rather than embarrassment. I have always noticed things, patterns and connections. My father said it was unusual for a woman, but he encouraged me to speak my thoughts when we were alone." "Your father was wiser than most men," Erik said firmly. "He raised a daughter who could have been a Jarl's advisor in her own right, had she been born male. Since she was not, she has become something perhaps more valuable. A Jarl's wife whose counsel I have learned to prize above that of many seasoned warriors." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of Thorvald One-Eye. Erik's most trusted advisor. The grizzled veteran paused at the edge of their seating area, his weathered face respectful but urgent. "My lord, forgive the interruption, but the scouts have returned with troubling news. The raiders young Olaf spotted are not random pirates. They bear the banner of Sven Bloodaxe, and their numbers are greater than we first believed." Erik rose from his chair, immediately shifting into his role as military leader. Sven Bloodaxe was a notorious Jarl from the Eastern Territories, known for his brutal raids and his particular hatred of Erik's family. A conflict with Sven had been brewing for years, ever since Erik had refused to support Sven's claim to disputed lands. "How many ships?" Erik asked, his mind already racing through defensive strategies. "At least 12 longships, possibly more," Thorvald replied grimly. "They are moving slowly, testing our coastal defenses, but their intent seems clear." Astrid rose from her chair as well, and Erik noticed how naturally she moved into the conversation, despite the traditional expectation that women would withdraw during discussions of warfare. "If Sven follows his usual patterns," she said quietly, "he will not attack immediately. He prefers to study his targets, find their weaknesses before striking. This gives us time to prepare, but also means he is planning something larger than a simple raid." Both men turned to look at her, Thorvald with surprise and Erik with growing appreciation. Once again, his wife had identified a crucial element that others might have missed. Sven's reputation for careful planning was well known, but connecting that knowledge to their current situation showed the kind of strategic thinking that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The implications of Astrid's pregnancy suddenly took on new weight. She carried not just Erik's heir, but potentially the future of their people if this conflict with Sven escalated into the full-scale war that seemed increasingly likely. The War Council convened within the hour, filling Erik's great hall with the low murmur of seasoned warriors discussing strategy. Long wooden tables had been arranged in a square, with Erik's carved chair at the head position. Maps made of stretched leather, marked with charcoal lines showing coastlines and settlements, lay spread across the surfaces. The smell of whale oil from the burning lamps mixed with the scent of wood smoke and leather. Erik took his place at the council table, with Thorvald to his right, and the other war chiefs arranged according to their rank and experience. What surprised the assembled men was the sight of Astrid entering the hall and taking a seat near the hearth, within hearing distance but not directly at the council table. Her presence was unusual but not unprecedented, as Jarl's wives sometimes observed important meetings that might affect household preparations. "Sven Bloodaxe has finally decided to press his old grievances," Erik began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Our scouts report 12 longships, but we must assume more could join him. What are our current defensive capabilities?" Ragnar the Bold, captain of Erik's personal guard, spoke first. "We have 8 ships of our own, my lord, and can call upon allies for perhaps 6 more if they can reach us in time. Our land forces number 200 trained warriors, plus another 100 farmers who can fight if needed. The coastal watchtowers have been reinforced," added Bjorn Ironbeard, who commanded the settlement's defences. "We can see Sven's approach long before he reaches our shores, but if he has truly brought such numbers, a direct assault on our harbour might succeed through sheer force." Erik nodded grimly, studying the leather map before him. Their settlement's strength lay in its natural harbour and the high ground where the great hall stood, but those advantages could be overcome by a determined enemy with superior numbers. From her position near the hearth, Astrid's clear voice cut through the discussion. "Has anyone considered that Sven might not intend a direct assault at all?" The men turned toward her with varying expressions of surprise, curiosity, and mild disapproval. Thorvald raised an eyebrow but gestured for her to continue, his respect for her insights overriding traditional protocol. "Sven has always been cunning rather than brave," Astrid explained, rising from her chair and moving closer to the council table. "His greatest victories came from trickery and misdirection, not honest battle. 12 ships moving slowly along our coast, visible to our watchers, feels more like a distraction than an invasion force." Erik felt a chill of recognition at her words. "What are you suggesting, wife? That while we focus our attention on the ships we can see, Sven's real attack may come from elsewhere, perhaps overland from the north, or from smaller boats launched from hidden positions along the fjord?" Astrid moved to stand beside the map, her finger tracing alternative routes an enemy might take. He knows our defenses are arranged to repel attacks from the sea. What if he is counting on that knowledge? The War Council fell silent as the men considered this possibility. Ragnar leaned forward to study the map more closely. The northern approach would be difficult but not impossible. There are game trails through the mountains that could accommodate small groups of warriors. And the old fishing camp at Seal Point has been abandoned for years, Bjorn added thoughtfully. Boats could be hidden there without our coastal watchers noticing, especially if they arrived at night. Erik felt a familiar surge of appreciation for his wife's strategic mind. Once again, she had identified a crucial factor that the experienced warriors had overlooked. If Astrid is correct, then our current preparations may be exactly what Sven wants us to do. But how can we be certain? Asked Magnus the Red, one of the younger warriors. If we divide our forces to guard against possibilities that may not exist, we weaken our defense against the ships we know are coming. This time Astrid looked directly at Erik before speaking, seeking permission to continue offering counsel in this most masculine of gatherings. Erik nodded slightly, giving her the encouragement she needed. We cannot be certain, she admitted, but we can send small scouting parties to check the northern trails and the abandoned camps without weakening our main defenses significantly. If I am wrong, we lose only a few days of travel time. If I am right, we avoid a trap that could cost us everything. Thorvald stroked his grey beard thoughtfully. The woman speaks sense. It would be like Sven to attempt such deception, and the cost of checking is small compared to the cost of being wrong. There is something else to consider, Erik said, his voice growing heavier. My wife carries my child, and this news must not reach Sven's ears. He would see a pregnant woman as both a weakness to exploit and a target for his revenge against our family. The weight of this revelation settled over the council like morning mist. Every man present understood the implications. A Jarl's pregnant wife represented the future of his lineage, making her both precious and vulnerable in times of conflict. She must be protected above all else, Ragnar declared, echoing the thoughts of every warrior present. If battle comes, she should be sent inland to safety. But Astrid shook her head firmly. I will not flee while our people face danger. My child is as much a part of this settlement as any warrior here, and its mother will not abandon her duties out of fear. Wife, Erik began, his tone gentle but concerned. Courage is admirable, but wisdom suggests that the Jarl's wife should stand with her people, not hide in the mountains like a frightened deer, Astrid interrupted, her green eyes flashing with determination. I may carry your child, husband, but I also carry my father's blood and my own honor. If Sven Bloodaxe seeks to test the strength of this settlement, he will find that strength in every person who calls it home. Erik looked around the council table and saw his own mixture of admiration and concern reflected in the faces of his warriors. Astrid's courage was undeniable, but so was the danger she would face if their enemies learned of her pregnancy. The sound of running footsteps in the hall's entrance interrupted the tense moment. A young messenger burst through the doors, his face flushed with excitement and fear. My lord, the boy gasped, struggling to catch his breath. The watchtowers report ships approaching from the west as well. Sven's forces are larger than we thought, and they are moving to surround us. The trap Astrid had predicted was springing closed around them, but with a scope none of them had fully anticipated. The test of steel was about to begin. The great hall erupted into controlled chaos as Erik's warriors leaped into action. The young messenger's news had confirmed Astrid's worst fears. Sven Bloodaxe was indeed attempting a coordinated attack from multiple directions. The ships they had been watching were only part of a larger force that now threatened to encircle the settlement entirely. Thorvald, take 50 men and secure the northern passes, Erik commanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. If Sven has sent forces overland, they must not reach the village undetected. Ragnar, position archers along the coastal cliffs. Make those ships pay dearly for every length they advance toward our harbour. As his warriors dispersed to their assigned positions, Erik turned to face the most difficult decision of the crisis. Astrid stood near the great hearth, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, her green eyes reflecting the flickering flames. The sight of her stirred conflicting emotions in his chest, fierce protective instincts, warring with respect for her courage and capabilities. The women and children must be moved to the mountain. Caves, he said quietly, approaching her as the hall emptied around them. You will lead them there, wife. Your knowledge of the old paths and your authority as Jarl's wife will ensure their safety." Astrid's jaw tightened with familiar stubbornness. "I understand your concern, husband, but my place is here. The people look to their leaders for strength in times of crisis. If the Jarl's wife flees at the first sign of danger, what message does that send?" "It sends the message that she is wise enough to protect the future of our line," Erik replied, his frustration evident despite his efforts to remain calm. "You carry more than just our child, Astrid. You carry the hope of our people's continuity." Before Astrid could respond, the sound of a war horn echoed across the settlement, 3 long blasts that signaled enemy ships entering the harbour mouth. Through the narrow windows of the Great Hall, they could see people running through the village streets, some carrying weapons toward the defensive positions, others gathering children and valuables for evacuation. "The attack has begun," Erik said grimly, reaching for his sword belt and the mail shirt that hung nearby. "There is no more time for debate." But Astrid surprised him by moving not toward the door that led to safety, but toward the carved wooden chest where his battle gear was stored. She lifted out his round shield, painted with the red dragon of his family, and held it toward him with steady hands. "Then let me arm my husband for battle, as is proper," she said, her voice carrying a strength that matched the steel of his weapons. "But know this, Erik Ironhand, I will not cower in caves while our people face death. If you forbid me to fight, then I will tend the wounded. If you forbid me to tend the wounded, then I will organize the evacuation. But I will not abandon my duties as your wife and as a daughter of warriors." Erik took the shield from her hands, their fingers touching briefly in the exchange. In that moment, he understood that attempting to force Astrid into hiding would not only fail, but would also diminish the very qualities that had made him respect her so deeply. "Very well," he said finally, buckling on his sword. "But you will stay within the Great Hall's defenses, and you will have a guard of my most trusted men. If the battle turns against us, you will accept evacuation without argument." Relief and gratitude flickered across Astrid's features. "Agreed, husband. Now go. Your warriors await their Jarl's leadership." The next hours blurred together in a chaos of steel and shouting. From the Great Hall's elevated position, Astrid could see the battle unfolding across multiple fronts. Sven's ships had indeed attacked the harbour, their dragon prows cutting through the morning waves as Erik's archers sent volleys of arrows down from the cliffs. But the naval assault proved to be exactly the distraction Astrid had predicted. The real danger came from the north, where Thorvald's warriors encountered a force of nearly 100 enemy fighters moving through the mountain passes. The sound of battle echoed off the rocky walls of the fjord as steel met steel in deadly earnest. Meanwhile, smaller groups of Sven's men emerged from hidden positions along the coastline, attempting to infiltrate the village from unexpected angles. Astrid found herself at the center of a different kind of battle, coordinating the defense of civilians and wounded warriors. Her earlier prediction had proven accurate, but rather than bringing satisfaction, the knowledge filled her with dread for what might come next. She moved through the Great Hall with calm efficiency, directing servants in the preparation of bandages and healing supplies, organizing the distribution of remaining weapons to able-bodied villagers, and maintaining communication with the scattered defensive positions. "My lady," called Sigrid the Wise, the settlement's healer, as she helped carry a wounded archer into the hall. This man took an arrow in the shoulder, but it missed the vital vessels. "He will live if we can stop the bleeding." Astrid knelt beside the injured warrior, her hands steady as she examined the wound. Her father had taught her basic healing skills, knowledge that most women possessed but few applied with such confidence in crisis situations. As she worked to clean and bind the injury, she became aware of other wounded men watching her with expressions of amazement and growing respect. "The Jarl's wife has gentle hands," murmured one warrior with a gashed leg. "My mother always said that women who could bring life into the world had special power to preserve it." The comment reminded Astrid of the secret she carried, the new life growing within her, even as death stalked the settlement around them. She placed a protective hand over her stomach for just a moment, whispering a silent prayer to Freya for the safety of her unborn child. A commotion at the hall's entrance announced the arrival of Erik himself, his mail shirt stained with blood and his shield bearing fresh scars from enemy weapons. His eyes immediately sought Astrid across the crowded space, as relief evident on his face when he saw her unharmed. "The harbour attack has been repelled," he announced to the assembled people, his voice carrying clearly despite his obvious exhaustion. "Sven's ships have withdrawn beyond arrow range, but they have not departed. The northern battle continues. and we have reports of enemy scouts probing our eastern defences. Astrid rose from beside the wounded archer and moved toward her husband, noting the way he favoured his left arm and the tight lines of pain around his eyes. "You are injured," she observed quietly. "A minor cut," Erik dismissed, but allowed her to examine the wound on his sword arm. The injury was indeed shallow, but it bled freely and would impair his fighting ability if not properly treated. As Astrid cleaned and bound Erik's wound, she spoke in a low voice, meant only for his ears. "Sven is testing our defences systematically, looking for weaknesses, but he has not committed his full force to any single attack. This suggests he still plans some greater stroke." Erik nodded grimly. "My thoughts as well, but what could he be waiting for? Each hour that passes allows our allies more time to reach us." Before Astrid could respond, the answer came in the form of another messenger, this one bearing news that chilled the blood of everyone who heard it. Sven Bloodaxe himself had been spotted leading a fresh force of warriors up the main approach to the settlement. Not the hidden northern route or the coastal infiltration points, but the direct path that led straight to the Great Hall itself. The final test was about to begin. The final assault came with the setting sun, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold that seemed to mirror the violence unfolding below. Sven Bloodaxe had revealed his true strategy at last. The scattered attacks throughout the day had been designed not just to test defences, but to exhaust Erik's forces and spread them thin across multiple positions. Now, with his enemies weakened and divided, Sven led his elite warriors in a direct assault on the Great Hall itself. From the hall's main entrance, Erik could see the approaching enemy force climbing the winding path that led up from the village. Sven himself was unmistakable at their head, a giant of a man whose red beard and scarred face had become legendary throughout the northern territories. His double-bladed axe caught the dying sunlight as he raised it above his head, letting loose a war cry that echoed off the surrounding mountains. 50 men, Erik counted grimly, watching the enemy formation. Sven's best warriors, fresh for battle while we have been fighting all day. Beside him, Ragnar the Bold checked his sword one final time. "Our men are tired, my lord, but they fight for home and family. That gives strength that fresh legs cannot match." Erik nodded, but his eyes sought Astrid across the hall's interior. She stood near the great hearth, no longer tending wounded warriors, but organising the final defence of the non-combatants. In her hands she held a long sayaxe, a single-edged blade that was both tool and weapon. The sight should have filled him with dread, but instead he felt a surge of fierce pride. His wife would not die cowering in a corner. "Listen to me, all of you," Erik called out, his voice carrying to every person in the hall. "Sven Bloodaxe comes for our home, our families, our future. He believes that because we are fewer in number, we are weaker in spirit. Let us show him the error of that belief." The great doors of the hall burst open as Sven's warriors reached the entrance. What followed was not a battle, but a storm of violence that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ancient building. Steel rang against steel as Erik's defenders met the assault, their intimate knowledge of the hall's layout helping to offset their numerical disadvantage. Erik found himself face to face with Sven Bloodaxe himself, their weapons meeting in a clash that sent sparks flying in the lamplight. The enemy Jarl was indeed formidable, his reach longer, his strength seemingly inexhaustible despite the day's campaigns. But Erik fought with the desperation of a man protecting everything he held dear. "You should have accepted my terms years ago, Ironhand," Sven snarled between axe strokes. "Your stubbornness has brought death to all who follow you." "My people choose their own fate," Erik replied, parrying a vicious overhead strike. "As do I." The battle raged around them with savage intensity. Ragnar fell defending the eastern wall, his sword arm nearly severed but still fighting until blood loss claimed him. Young Olaf, barely 16 summers old, stood over the body of his fallen uncle, wielding a woodsman's axe with surprising skill against seasoned raiders.